Oh, yeah, let's get after it. It's top five time on the Brian Campbell Experience. Hey, why don't you get a little bit of this? Why don't you get a little bit of this channel too? If you haven't joined the team already, you can do so by helping me out, liking the video if you like this kind of content, and of course, hitting subscribe as the BCX continues to invade your sensibilities, invade your face hole, maybe even your ear hole with that obvious, ridiculous and irresistible performance enhancing audio. Let's get into a top five this week of my liking for sure, mixing the worlds of rock music and art together. We're talking about the top five album covers in history, according to me, you're art connoisseur of some weird degree. No, obviously, I'm a huge music fan and a huge fan of all things art, and do a little painting myself on the side, and have always loved what an album cover is. Growing up, my dad had an incredible late 60s, early 70s vinyl collection that I'm very lucky to have already received as a gift from him today. And when you come up as a kid, and it's the cassette era, right, in the 80s, but you look back on what vinyl's all about. It's a piece of art in so many ways. It tells a story about the music that's come inside of there, where that band is at that point, what the concept and the message of the album ultimately is. It was something that really got lost in my age group and my expansion from cassettes to CDs to eventually the Napster digital music burn a copy of every CD movement, which led to iPods, and suddenly you had every album at your fingertips, and it wasn't so much about that appreciation. Well, this is obviously one of the reasons that I got hardcore into vinyl during the pandemic, and a lot of that was to return to that physical piece of something that you can press pause on your life, put it on the put it on the turntable, put the needle down, read the liner notes, and really experience the whole thing. So growing up, I had a huge and incredible exposure to album covers and records, like my dad's copy here of Cheap Thrills by Big Brother and the Holding Company, 1968. An incredible cartoon job here from underground cartoonist Robert Crumb, which was originally meant for the back cover, by the way. This was supposed to be the cover with Janis Joplin, but Janis, a huge comic fan, loved it so much. I mean, you got the Hells Angels right here. You've got some very suggestive art, which was as a child was like, what the heck's going on there? And then you've got legendary ones like 1971's Who's Next, which was really just the band driving down the road in the UK, needing to take a whiz, pulling to the side to a mining area, this sort of monument here of sorts, and just taking a leak. Incredible photo by famous rock photographer Ethan Russell, who would go on to shoot the cover for the Beatles' Let It Be, the Rolling Stones' Get Your Yayas Out live album. So it's iconic artwork, album covers like this that really drew me into it. But ultimately, everyone's taste is a little bit different. So these are your boy BC's top five favorite album covers in the history of popular music. Let's get ready. Drum roll it, please. We begin with number five. It came out in 1968 by the psychedelic slash progress, well, more psychedelic band, the Moody Blues, and it's called In Search of the Lost Chord. And this is a wild album cover. You can go everywhere from spooky to disturbing. I knew about this cover long before I ever knew about the band, and always wanted to know what's the deal with it. It scared me a little bit. Ultimately, this was a design by an artist named Phil Travers. It was the band's third album, the first album cover Travers would do with the Moody Blues. He would go on to do six in total. None were as creative, colorful, and really as suggestive as this one. Travers would go on to say the band wanted me to illustrate the concept of meditation, and certainly have the drastic contrast between life and death, with the skull here, the baby down here. It's wild. This is such an underrated album, in my opinion, in rock lore, right in the prime of that psychedelic era. Ride My Seesaw, obviously a very big single there off the top of the record for the Moody Blues. You can get into them easy. The records cost used about $2 or $3 each. They really tend to add up in terms of the quality of the music overall. But that artwork, that cover was always just sort of like, I got to find out what's going on. I need to find out more of what this album is trying to tell me. Just a perfect example of the late 60s, that psychedelic rock movement where it was really about the merging of genres. It was really about, dropping out, tuning in, turning on, and just really just letting yourself go. I think In Search of the Lost Chord by the Moody Blues really just captures it. And oh, by the way, it's got the music, in my opinion, to back it up. Let's slide over to number 4. This is a cover that, good Lord, do I love. It's the first solo album of David Crosby in 1971, titled If I Could Only Remember My Name. There's so much going on in the story behind this record. So Crosby, Stills, and Nash's debut self-titled record had already come out. They hit it big, but what they wanted to always be, CSN, and eventually Y, of course, with Neil Young, was this collective where each member could put out their own solo work in between. And that certainly was the story of CSN/Y throughout the 1970s. This was a very interesting record in time because this really populates what has become, if I had to pick, a niche genre from this time of music, psychedelic folk has always been something that I think even today with, popular indie bands like my favorite band, My Morning Jacket, who have really at times, including especially on the It Still Moves record from 2003, really captured that psychedelic folk feeling. David Crosby, through his time with the Byrds into CSN, the songs he penned himself, which was always few and far between compared to his more prolific partners, whether it been Roger McGuinn and the Byrds, Stephen Stills and Graham Nash of CSN. But when he does write songs, think Guinevere on the debut CSN album, so unique, so psychedelic, so weird. There's so much of that going on in this album, and I think the cover designed by Gary Burden really captures that. It's obviously Crosby's face with the sea behind him, and nautical themes were always such a big thing in Crosby's life. Being out on the water on a boat always produced the imagery of his songwriting. Wooden Ships, one of the classic CSN tracks, which he co-wrote, a big part of that. You can go all the way to the 1977 CSN album by Crosby, Stills, Nash. Also, by the way, shot and designed by Gary Burden, has that feel on a boat. The songs really match up with that. But why do I love this artwork, and why does it tell the tale of this album so much? Look, Crosby's always been a difficult guy in rock history. He's been a guy who can act like he belongs, can contribute to larger groups and music and tracks with his undeniable singing voice, the great harmony work he did with Graham Nash in particular, and just his bombastic personality. He also can rub a lot of people the wrong way. But in 1970, his girlfriend at the time, the love of his life, Christine, tragically died. And really, Crosby hit rock bottom that next year. And I think his friends in the music industry, and Crosby always really had connective tissue across to so many different bands, especially in that Laurel Canyon, LA scene, of course. But even beyond that, they were worried about him. They were worried about, I think, that he would potentially take his own life over the depression he went through. So he was on the verge of penning his first solo album. Remember, Graham Nash just had big success with his first one. Stephen Stills, with Love the One You're With, really probably had the most success of the three of them with that first launch. But this might be the best record of the three original CSN members in terms of their solo work. It's so unique. What makes it unique is David Crosby brought broken fragments of songs to the recording sessions. And because his friends in the rock music industry felt so bad for what he was going through personally, they really wanted to make sure they helped lift his spirits and helped him in the recording session. So every single night, a random group of members of bands like Santana, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, CSN, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, they'd show up and they'd contribute to these partially written tracks. And there's so many jams in this. There's so much, a lot of that weird lyrics, just very, I mean, look, this cover really tells the tale of the music that is going to come. And I think when you're ranking your favorite album covers in rock history, sometimes it's just for the unmistakable art, right? Think the Moody Blues album cover that I just showed you. But a lot of times it's what the connection between that artwork says about the music that you're about to digest. If I Could Only Remember My Name by David Crosby is just one of those perfectly weird sounds, albums that just drop in the middle of a great era and movement that stands out on its own. I mean, Jerry Garcia's slide guitar work on this album is incredible. All those famous names I mentioned just jamming and collaborating together. It's one of those rare times where most of the majority of these songs were finished and fully written in that studio. And how about Gary Burden, who has extensive history on album covers, not just this one right here. How about Blue by Joni Mitchell, Morrison Hotel by The Doors? Pretty much all of the CSNY and or solo album covers of the major ones of all those members, including a huge chunk of Neil Young's career. He did the big Eagles album covers, America, Mamas and the Papas, Jackson Browne, Poco, the list goes on and on. But superimposing the background in the middle of David Crosby's face right here. Love it. Reminds me of the Joni Mitchell Hey Jera album cover, which has a similar design in that. So that's number 4 on that list. And if you haven't, again, caught this David Crosby record, wow, get fired up, get ready, sit down, put the headphones on, maybe row 8, have a good time with yourself. Let's go to number 3 on the BC Top 5 album cover countdown. We're going to 1969. And for maybe the most avant-garde record in popular music history ever, it's fitting to have an artistic statement that is as aggressive, but also in the end as beautiful. Bitches Brew by Miles Davis, the ultimate jazz fusion record, in the artwork here by German artist Matti Klarwein. You have to really open up the full package here to see what he was trying to create. And it's just aggressive, it's bold, it is really just incredible. And of course it had to be, because this record, out of all the great Miles Davis work, which spans so many decades, and he'll tell you, when he was alive, he'd tell anybody who was willing to listen that he changed the course of music and created new turns and genres and collaborations, and really was that pioneer ahead of the game multiple 4 or 5 times. I think that can be true. I mean, we don't have that great 70s jazz fusion era where you bring together the ethos of jazz with rock instruments without the work that Miles Davis did right around this time, 1969, of course, heading into the early 70s, the On the Corner album, the Jack Johnson tribute. I mean, it is a different type of music. No music is different in this genre, the 1969's Bitches Brew, which I don't really have to explain it. You just got to put it on, and you're going to have to put it on a lot more than once to really understand it, then read the history behind how it was recorded. It's not just that Miles at the time and always would put together these absolute all-star lineups of the extreme top shelf guys in the industry and use multiple people on different tracks, use 2, 3 different elite keyboardists. You got Chick Corea over here and Herbie Hancock over here and John McLaughlin and everyone you've ever heard of. But the fact that this album was so spliced together in the production after the fact, in the sound engineering, and taking fragments of the jams and putting them together to create new stretches, there's really, up to that point, been nothing like it before, and in a lot of ways, nothing like it since, or at least on this level. It's an acquired taste for as popular as it is. But I mentioned that German artist, Matti Klarwein. For my money, pound for pound, he's the best album cover creator maybe ever. It doesn't have as decorated a roster of big hits as some of the other people that we're going to mention that designed albums on this countdown, but that specific style of painting, of art, of creation, you saw a lot during that stretch in popular music, and all of them stood out. I opened this clip by saying, when you're an 8-year-old kid going through your dad's vinyl collection and you find Cheap Thrills by Big Brother and the Holding Company, you're going to stop and look at it. You're also going to stop and look at 1969's Abraxas by Santana with, nudity on the cover, but just incredible artwork. That's also Matti Klarwein, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And how about Greg Allman's very famous solo debut there, Laid Back, which has a similar design structure by that same artist. Some people give Marty credit for a cover he didn't do, Sextent by Herbie Hancock, but it's very similar in that style. It's easy to confuse. But this is just an incredible album cover for an incredible album, and really allows you to open it up and look at it a lot and find new parts jumping out of it that you didn't notice before. Deep themes in there. And this is the same artist, by the way, who would go on to do Miles Davis's Live/Evil record, which has an even more elaborate and ridiculous cover to it. But it definitely makes a statement, and it definitely says something. My number 2 pick on my top 5 favorite rock albums of all time, popular music, what have you. It's hard not to have this number 1, but it did get edged out. It's Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, 1975. I don't have the physical hard copy yet because it sort of falls under my my self-governing rules when it comes to purchasing vinyl, where certain pieces of vinyl, including this record, which is regularly overpriced or high priced used, no matter what store you're going to go into, you're not going to find it for $3, right? You're going to have to pay $20, $30, $40, $50. I want to find it on my own terms. I don't want to buy it on Facebook Marketplace or eBay. I want to find it at the price I'm looking for on my own terms at the right time. I've yet to do that. I've got the poster, used to have it behind me, because I think the artwork on it, the photo is it's so deep. It's got such an incredible meaning. So it was photographed by Aubrey Poe Powell, who, if you're a rock album artwork historian, you would know that he joined forces with Storm Thorgerson to be responsible for most of Pink Floyd's greatest art cover work, including Dark Side of the Moon. They would collaborate with a London-based company that had a long success in making album covers or just having a design in art known as Hypnosis. This is a company that would design Led Zeppelin's font logo of their name there in cursive, would do the Houses of the Holy album cover, and would do so many popular and famous albums from this time from bands like Genesis, ELO, Bad Company, Black Sabbath, Paul McCartney and Wings, and Peter Gabriel. And in particular, Peter Gabriel's first three solo records to end the 1970s, all of which were self-titled. I've got two of them right here. This one's typically known as Scratch. This one as Car. Incredible. The other one would be Melt, by the way, as terms of their unofficial names. But this is the work that we're talking about that Powell and Hypnosis and Thorgerson are used to. But Wish You Were Here is just completely different. It's a famous photo, of course. You can see it right here. Two gentlemen shaking hands, shot on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, California. The main difference, of course, is the gentleman on the right in the suit is on fire. The men in the photo are stuntmen Ronnie Rondell, the one on fire, and Danny Rogers. And this photo stands out to me in so many deep and amazing ways. If you're looking for the story of the album, then the song Wish You Were Here, the title track of this record, and really the album as a whole, is a tribute in so many ways to Syd Barrett, the founding co-founder of Pink Floyd, the original lead singer, the man, the genius behind Piper at the Gates of Dawn, their debut album, which was, one of the marquee psychedelic rock records of all time. He, went a little bit too deep in the psychedelic phase with LSD and drugs, and it led to mental health disorders. And pretty soon he's out of the band. And this album, that title track song, was really in so many ways from the band a tribute to him in a lot of ways. But really, this image goes deeper. So Powell would go on to say that the band liked the image because of what it represented to them, which was a statement against record company executives who largely regarded musicians at the time as money-making machines and demanded one hit song after another. The song Have a Cigar, which is also on this record, really plays into that theme in so many ways. It's the band sort of frustrated with where they stand in the record business as a whole, which is obviously one of the dirty businesses in the history of human life in so many ways. So they go out and take this picture on the Warner Brothers studio lot. They ultimately take 15 takes, lighting Ronnie on fire 15 times. The 15th time was at the opposite angle of the photo they actually used, which meant a wind gust blew the fire all over his face, burnt his mustache. He had to fall to the ground. And at that point, he stood up and said, "Look, I'm done." Luckily, they had already gotten that very famous shot. But for the statement it makes about the record business, I can understand that. To me, it always made a bigger statement, as did the lyrics on the song and really the vibe and mood of the music. Don't forget that this album only really has, 6 tracks, and half of the album is Shine On You Crazy Diamond in about 3, 4, 5 different parts. And it really was, to me, a tribute, but like a message about Syd Barrett and really about, when I look at that, I look at this, the band is the member on the left side reaching out the hand to shake. Syd Barrett is on the right, and he's on fire because he's in so many ways lost his way. And as somebody who's, openly sort of battled mental health issues in the past few years, I can really understand that photo. It so speaks to me. I love having it as a poster on my wall. I loved at the time where a few years ago for Morning Combat, we made sort of a meme out of that, where you had Luke on one side, you had me on fire on the other, which I think it sort of tells the story of Morning Combat in a lot of ways, as Luke is the serious straight man on the left, me as the goofball, ridiculous guy on the right, on fire, acting all out of control. But I think on a deeper level of mental health, that photo always spoke to me in so many ways, because it's a balance. As an adult, managing your mental health. I think that there's this. Mauro Ranallo said it when he put out his bipolar rock and roller documentary in 2018 on Showtime, that he calls it magic, that we all have got a little bit of that in us. And obviously, if unchecked, it can lead, to bad mental health turns in so many ways. But I think art is so fueled by that same magic. I mean, one of my favorite bands, Portugal the Man, has an iconic track, So American, where you have that refrain of "There's a madness in us all." And I've always looked at that cover as sort of Both of those men on the cover are me. The one on the left is sort of the front-facing guy I'm trying to be to hold it all together. The one on the right is that combination of the creative, artistic, crazy side of me that we all have that's on fire, but you're trying to rein that in and keep it, get just enough from that side of your brain without letting it overflow. I've always sort of related to that. Ronnie Rondell, though, the stuntman who would be on fire would later lament the attention that he got from this shoot because he felt it overshadowed the great movie stunt work he was known for, most importantly, 1974's The Towering Inferno, a movie which featured many scenes of people on fire starring Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Faye Dunaway, and Fred Astaire. But hey, Ronnie Rondell, I'll never forget the role you played in this one. Just an incredible album cover of just an incredible album that really at times I thought was maybe my favorite album of all time, right? It's floated in and around that top 5, that top 10 area because of the powerful meaning, because of the incredible guitar work by David Gilmour. But it's really that cover that tells so much of the band's story and even deeper, especially when you find out what they looked at the initial meaning as, what I always thought the initial meaning was around Syd Barrett, and then obviously how I've sort of, as we all do with art, decode our own message or our own meaning from it. Just an incredible, incredible photo and one of the most incredible covers. And shout out once more to Hypnosis, who really, really had left their mark in so many ways across rock history. But number one, this is a record my dad had. The colors jumped out at me, the imagery. I ended up having this poster on my wall in my first apartment for 5 years in my early 20s. It is still one of my favorite albums today, even though it's arguably the worst of the 3 albums that the Jimi Hendrix Experience put out together before they would eventually break up, and Jimmy would have a little bit of that solo run with Band of Gypsies and beyond before his untimely death joining the 27 Club. And that's 1967's Axis Bold as Love. The colors just grab you. The imagery just grabs you. It's an album cover depicting the band as various members of Vishnu, which is one of the principal deities in the religion of Hinduism. David King designed this cover. Roger Law painted the band on based upon a photo of them by Carl Ferris. And then the painting was superimposed on top of a mass-produced religious poster at the time. Now, look, the album at the time and over history hasn't been without controversy. Hendrix didn't like it. The record company essentially put it out without him finalizing it. He had a dismay at the choice because not only did it teach him never to be hands-off like this again, but he would go on to tell the media many times that the 3 of us in the band had nothing to do with the album cover. Hendrix would say in hindsight that he would have preferred an homage to his Native American heritage rather than the Hinduism in here, but it really was that connection to Hinduism and religion in general that for a good time made it a very controversial choice. In fact, the Malaysian government would initially ban the album in response to Hindus expressing anger over the use of that religious imagery on a rock album. Can totally understand that, by the way. Critics also felt that the cover in many ways perpetuated stereotypes surrounding Eastern culture, not to mention that it was being exploited by Western media. Also true. But the colors on this album were in the theme taken from the 7 chakras or energy centers of the human body. And I just never forget seeing this and just being as a child, just like, that's about the coolest thing I've ever seen, from the snakes to I mean, it's wild, and it extends on the flip backside cover of it. Historians have long believed that the album's title track, Bold as Love, is widely interpreted as a meditation about the power of love and its transformative abilities. And I guess the word access, which comes before Bold as Love on the title of the album, would represent Earth. I think I can get down with that. Hendrix, many believe, was attempting to draw an analogy ultimately at the time between the physical movement of the Earth's axis and the transformative nature of profound love. A lot of big words there, but I guess I can get behind that. Interesting, though, that he didn't have that control at the time. And that's a big part of why his next album, the double album Electric Ladyland, the album that I believe is the greatest album in the history of rock and roll, became Hendrix's magnum opus. It was an album in which he ultimately, I wouldn't say but parted ways with longtime producer Chaz Chandler, bassist of the Animals, because he was just sick of the restriction. We talked about Pink Floyd with their troubles with the record companies and always wanting that short hit song that'll play on the radio and sell. Jimmy wanted to do stuff his own way. That's why Electric Ladyland, the album that would follow this, would be in a lot of ways his own attempt at jazz fusion or merging all these different styles together. You would have so many long songs with jams in them and just a incredible sense of imagery with the music. And Hendrix has always been into everything from spiritualism to mysticism to, you know, aliens and space culture and all of that. I mean, he didn't learn chords and typical, read music. He played colors, and there's a lot of that in that. There's also a lot of that in Axis Bold as Love, which is why it can only be number one, in my opinion, if the rest of the record sort of fuels the cover design. And an Axis Bold as Love to me is Jimi Hendrix flexing his songwriting ability, which is probably the most underrated part of his game. We think of him as the greatest guitar virtuoso of all time, very underrated voice, can write pop rock hits. But I think this album, Axis Bold as Love, was his attempt to channel his heroes, which were Bob Dylan and the Lennon-McCartney songwriting duo of the Beatles. This is his almost, sort of in some ways introspective love album, even though there's fantastic rockers on here. But this, of the three albums he did with the Experience, I think is the most different than the other two. And I think that album cover really just perfectly captures that. So everyone's going to have different picks, and obviously it's hard to cut it down to five. I've got no shortage of wild honorable mentions here, just the same. I got to shout out the incredible string band. Aaron Bronstetter sent me this record. The 5,000 Spirits or the Layers of the Onion is the title, from 1967. Pretty good record. Got into the incredible string band a little bit, but this imagery is just wild. I mean, if I could paint what my mind's trying to paint, I'd probably be painting this entire cover here. It was a Dutch design collective known as The Fool that put this together, featuring a multicolor hermaphrodite juxtaposing both light and darkness. Now, I don't know if I necessarily pulled that from looking at this cover, but I did do a little bit of research. That same team there, the Fool, would design the inner sleeve on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album, and would also be responsible for painting psychedelic designs and imagery on the instruments used by the Beatles during their psychedelic run, and also Cream, particularly around the time of that of their second record, which had so much psychedelic imagery as in the sound and the album cover, just the same. Very, very big fan of this one. Also, if I've got to go to one hip hop, I'm going to go to my favorite hip hop album of all time, the jazz rap classic from 1991, The Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest. Don't physically have that copy on me at the moment, had the CD growing up, but that album cover of the curvy shape of a woman's body, didn't realize that until now, that that's not a painting. That's actually a photo, originally done with a white backdrop. They changed that to black last minute, and the band did approve it, but it's a woman's body painted in the colors of green and red. Very interesting album cover in so many ways. It always stood out to me. So did two albums from the year 2000, right? In the year 2000. How about Kid A by Radiohead? This is, of course, the Kid A Amnesiac combined one, where you've got Amnesiac on the back, Kid A on the front. They put this together. Shout out to Corey Marlin, huge MK music donk, who sent me this and was like, BC, I'm not going to wait for you to get into these great records 10 years from now. I'm going to send them to you now. We got to talk about this. Well, we got to talk a lot about Radiohead, which I'm in the midst of painstakingly slow devouring their entire lineup. In the 90s, I sort of stopped after OK Computer. The Kid A record cover, it just speaks so much to the music you're about to see. And the story behind it is interesting. English artist Stanley Donwood would be inspired by a photograph taken during the Kosovo War, and he would call this artwork a symbol of blooming danger and shattered expectations. And if you follow the arc of Radiohead's music, OK Computer, what was that, 96, 97, changed the game for them as alternative rockers into just a crazy cornucopia of sound. But Kid A took them in an entirely new, different, abstract, sometimes jarring direction. I mean, you don't put on Kid A once and be like, man, that was really good, let's talk about it. You got to decode it time after time, track after track. And I think the mountains, the coldness of this photo, of this artwork, really sort of welcome you to what you're going to get into. And even though the majority of albums that I'm showing you are more artistic works, I like pictures too. The Who cover of Who's Next is a big one, even though the sky in the background, by the way, not natural. That was brought in. That was done painting wise to set the scene later. 2000's Heartbreaker by Ryan Adams. This is the box set version, but This used to be in the Morning Combat studio. It's just such a classic photo, in my opinion, taken by Nashville rock photographer David McClister, who would shoot album covers for everybody from Willie Nelson to Uncle Kracker. This just tells the tale of what this record is. The first solo record for Adams after he broke up with Whiskey Town, but it paints a portrait of who he is, a heartbroken, self-sabotaging pop rock genius in so many ways. I mean, he's kind of canceled today. He's going through some rough times today. Still listen to his music on the regular though, but there's something about what a rock album cover can do to tell a story, to shine a light on a mood, to really speak through the medium of art. It's incredible. So many others could have made this list. Leave in the comments which ones move you, which ones I missed out. But this was my choice. BC, The Experience, top 5, start to finish. Hope you liked it. Like, subscribe, tell a friend, tell me what kind of top 5s are you looking for? I know it's a weird old trope, but it's fun. It's interesting. Get experienced. It's your boy BC. It's hotter in here than I thought it was. We out.